Welcome back for another installment of our study of Sir James G. Frazer's The Golden Bough. We're going to be looking at section 9.2, The Beneficent Powers of Tree Spirits, and chapter 10, Relics of Tree Worship in Modern Europe. As always, Jordan is here to guide us with her production skills. And new to the program, you may have caught him on the last installment, it's Aastik from India. And I'm super excited to have you here today for a variety of different reasons. I mean, you're very well studied, but coming from a different part of the world, some of those rituals that we'll talk about today are actually from India, northern India, and your boots on the ground. You could perhaps tell us if you've seen these things, if they're still in practice, what it's like. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say. A lot of what's covered today, I don't know. I guess you could dig into it, but it's not as prominent in America. Maybe it's worth thinking about examples in America, but it's primarily confined to Europe, and like I said, India.
Yeah, I mean, it still goes on. I see it every day. I pass through a banyan tree, and every day you would see like statues of gods and goddesses that are kept under it. So it's supposed to be like we are uh, trying to what do you say? To set some to set off to give someone a bride. What do you call it? That's that sort of thing. We are going to remove that statue from it. We're going to let go. I'm sorry, I don't know. But like
Yeah,
there's
I understand what you're saying.
yeah
Your
to
obeisance, paying respects,
yeah
etc.
paying
Yeah,
respects, yeah, basically that. So it goes on every day. I'm, it's very it's in
it's
the
just
air, by it's
yeah.
just that nobody thinks that it's abnormal. It's like it's everywhere. So that's the thing.
Well, we have that here too. I mean, in different ways. I haven't dug deep into this, but a lot of what we're going to be talking about today are different rituals that involve um, placating or worshiping or saying prayers to trees and things like that. I mean, the thing that's most obvious to me in America is the Christmas tree ritual, and that is something that is so blended into Christian and American culture. People don't even stop to think about whether or not, like, where it comes from, whether or not it's biblical. Like, if you tell people that the Christmas tree is actually spoken against in the Bible, that would like make their heads explode. Specifically, Jeremiah 10. So, how did it happen? How did this pagan tree worship practice get syncretized with Christian rite and ritual? Although I don't know if it's perfectly going to match with what we're talking about today, because most of the festivals that we'll look into occur in the spring, and Christmas and Saturnalia happen at the end of the year. But it's still worth thinking about how many things we're just bathed in, that we're just immersed in, and we just take for granted, and we don't even think about their point of origination. And I imagine something like that's going on in India as well.
Yeah, it goes on, but I don't think people have this idea of that it's something coming from the outside. People have very local beliefs here. So even beliefs vary from one family to another. So one family might have this particular god that they worship. So they might have a
Mm-hmm.
particular set of trees that are precious to them. So it's a very local system. It's not like homogenized all over the country that this particular thing happens all over all at once. It's kind of what do you say? It's not under one banner. Um,
It is and it isn't. And this is kind of the interesting thing about what Frazer and Young and individuals are trying to communicate to us. I think when we look at all these different examples of tree veneration and renewal and maypoles and things like this, how does it keep coming up in all these diverse cultures, right? So it may go under different names, but at the same time, there is this sort of universal striving for a truth that tends to go through evolutionary stages of positing a type of animism where we see spirits within the groves that ultimately evolves into a type of polytheism where we have a spirit of vegetation that then gets concretized in an anthropomorphic figure, right? Whether, and we're going to talk about these figures today. What some of these figures are known as Green George, that's primarily in England, or Jack in the Green, again another English a manifestation of this green man archetype that individuals like von Franz have talked about within Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols. And there's a variety of other echoes of this idea. I don't know exactly how it's going to manifest in India. Perhaps we can dwell on the examples that Frazer gives us, but the different household gods and the different regions we may see are all sort of emanating from a similar font.
Yeah, I mean, there's even the most iconic story that is being told about the main cultural export, you can say, of India is like the Ramayana. It's a epic myth, and it features prominently the a prince is given a sentence to it's called vanvas. It's like you are exiled to a forest and you have to stay there for 14 years. So it's like very prominent thing. And in the end, the prince, he returns to rescue his wife that was captured by a demon and in the modern Sri Lanka, and he's supported by Vanars, and then Vanars, they're actually depicted as monkeys, but if you look at the etymology of the word, it's actually forest beings. So like he was like supported by forest beings in his uh, to to rescue his wife. That's the thing. I mean these things, they kind of manifest everywhere. Like the king, I was looking through different tree spirits, and then I could find it in Finnish culture, in Ukrainian culture. There are king of the forest, queen of the forest, and they are depicted through different things in Japan too. So,
Yep.
so thing.
I Yeah, that's fantastic. I think we should try to progress in the slide deck. I think a lot more of this information will come out, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Um, One of the things I do want to talk about here, what motivated this whole journey into the Golden Bough is my research into Stanley Kubrick, which is something that Aastik and I share an interest in, and I wonder, we're going to talk about modern echoes of this green man archetype and this anthropomorphic manifestation of the spirit of vegetation. You mentioned the May Kings and May Queens. I have some artwork. A lot of today, we're just going to be looking at some artwork and some index charts from all the different examples that Frazer gave us. But I wonder if the Pinocchio story is relevant to this conversation. Pinocchio seems to have it's complicated, right? Because there's these fairies that are involved, and maybe Jordan can speak to this. She knows more about fairy mythology than I do. I think her and I are going to study the Pinocchio story and more properly apply it to the works of Kubrick, specifically artificial intelligence, which he talked about as the Pinocchio project for decades. But I was thinking about it in terms of these spirits of vegetation that take on a body. There seems to be some life essence in the wood that is conferring some sort of fertility uh, 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 benefit upon Geppetto by giving him this son. And then I just started thinking about that in context of artificial intelligence and perhaps how the Pinocchio story shaped other Kubrick films. But we'll get to that slide later. I don't want to go too deep into it right now, but that's why I have Pinocchio here on the screen, and we've talked about maypoles and whatnot. So perhaps we should progress to the next slide, if that's okay, Jordan. And if you want to say anything about fairies in all of this, I think it's super relevant. Your mic is muted right now, so
Yes. Yeah, it might become relevant as we go through. I do think the story of Pinocchio is really fascinating. And to me, the linkage to the tree beings or yeah, I don't know what we want to call them, is Pinocchio. And it's more apparent in the original story than the Disney story. But I haven't seen the Disney movie in a long time. I could be overlooking some more obvious clues there. Maybe it's super direct. But Pinocchio is made of wood from a
right.
tree. And the tree is said to be sad, to be cut up in such a way.
Right.
At least one version of the story. So this reanimation of Pinocchio to me is a reanimation, not a bringing the divine spark into an inorganic being. It is an organic being from the get-go.
Sure.
And he has a fairy helper, originally with blue hair, to help him along through his own journey of really bringing his true desires into physical form. So
Good stuff. I'm glad that you included that detail. I mean, there's not one. I don't think there's one just story of Pinocchio. I think the Carlo Carlotti is the one that I have in mind. It's been a long time since I've read it, but I believe the Pinocchio story. I'm not sure. You would know better than me, but I think, like many of these folk tales, it goes through. It's like a spoken tradition, and it goes through a lot of different iterations, and then finally someone writes it down. So, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a version where it talked about the tree being ensouled to begin with.
yeah, I mean, the author is credited with bringing a lot of folklore into the written word. I can't speak to Pinocchio specifically, but what you said
No.
is very likely.
Cool. Well, this first chart here that we have on slide 131, I believe, it kind of goes into what I've already said, that there's this progression that Frazer outlines where we go from animism, polytheism, and anthropomorphism, where the more rude people, remedial savages, right, as Frazer tends to speak, the idea is that the trees are living spirit bodies, and this leads to sacred tree worship. And generally, these trees are thought, we've talked about this a little bit, regards to Pinocchio bestowing fertility or a son on Geppetto. Not only that, they provide rain, the growth of crops, and reproduction. So, and then as time goes on, the idea evolves where the trees are viewed as abodes for the forest gods, and that's where we get them kind of ruling the woodlands. And like I said, we get to this anthropomorphic bent, and the spirit is in human form with woodland symbols. Oftentimes, like they'll have leaves in their hands, hair, or aspects of wood coming out of them, or something like that. One of the examples that I've included here is a painting by Evelyn de Morgan called The Dryad. And I thought this was an exceptional painting. I'll see if I have some information beyond the title on this painting. Now that's all I have right now, but that's why I included that. But I think it's already been kind of covered so far. Aastik, I don't know if you want to weigh in and say anything else here before we go to the next slide. Ooh, we lost your audio.
I was looking at this painting. Hi. I was looking at this painting before this presentation. So, what I found out was that this title, The Dryad, was invoked by John Keats in a poem called The Ode of Nightingale. So, I mean, he calls the nightingale a dryad of the trees. So, the nightingale itself is a spirit, tree spirit. So I thought about, like, what is the oral atmosphere in a forest. Like, we talked about different plants, we talked about snakes and animals, but like when we go to a forest, there's an oral atmosphere. Like, you hear different sounds. There's quietness, there's water rustling, there's birds. So I think it kind of manifests as spirits inside of us. So I was thinking about that, and the title of the poem was called The Ode to Nightingale. And then he talks about in that poem that he is going, like, the nightingale is immortalized in that song, that the beautiful song that she's singing. But he's going to die. He's a mortal being. So I thought, like, Rocket Nightingale. So I thought Nick Nightingale. So then I thought Eyes Wide Shut, and then I connected it
Oh,
to.
that's yeah.
Then I thought, like, okay, the Nightingale song. It's a song that's eternal. It's being immortalized. But the John Keats, he laments that he cannot be immortal as that beautiful song, and his body is limited. And that sort of thing. I thought, like, Nightingale, that it sparks desire. It sings the song of desire, and then it's something eternal and otherworldly and abstract. But you are a limited being, limited, not limited. I mean, you're like a finite being in the sense of you're in a body. So I thought about that. That's longing
I,
to be one with
I'm
the
really
eternal.
glad that you brought this up, because I think it raises a very interesting question. Like, how do all these cultures start with animism? And you painted this beautiful scene through the Keats poem and your own experience where the forest seems alive with all these different sounds, right? And that seems like a plausible mechanism to me. That I don't recall if Frazer says this. That seems like a plausible mechanism for me, where in the mind of someone who's thrown into this world, and you hear this aural symphony coming from the trees, right, through birds and through all these other different animals, why wouldn't you start to associate um, the animal voice with perhaps an entity that is ensouled within the tree? Maybe that is where this idea of animated nature comes from. I Frazer doesn't say this, but just riffing with you,
Yeah.
I wonder if that's at least where it was suggested from.
Yeah, I think that's the case because it's about maybe if some tribal person is sleeping in the dark, he hears some sound, and then her child says, "Oh, what's that sound?" And she like weaves a story about what's that sound about, and then this story she tells her child that story, and then it gets like a meme. It spreads around, and then it creates this culture like, oh, when this time of the year happens, this sound comes, and then this is connected to this particular deity or this particular animal or tree spirit, you know. So I thought about that. I mean, from the psychological perspective.
Yeah, I wonder also if just the wind going through the trees creating sound, if this also lent credibility to the idea of it being ensouled. Jordan, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this. This feels like a topic that you would have something valuable to add to.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add, but that's an interesting perspective that the wind itself is spirit or uh, other ways you could describe prana would not necessarily be wind, but sometimes the wind is used either as a metaphor or as a literal source accredited with life giving.
I
And
mean,
you talk about having the winds knocked out of you. What
yeah.
exactly does that mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, you tend to think about breathing is associated with life and your own ability to function. Like, why wouldn't you see wind as being this life-giving force that could animate all of nature? I'm not sure. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep the background minimized. That's why I'm going on and off mute.
I gotcha. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, Jordan, if we could go to slide 132.
That's a good slide. You mentioned vertigo
I
in the
mean,
last meeting, so I remember.
that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. So the reason why, I didn't, this isn't like rocket science, really nothing is, but that's a whole other story. But um, the whole reason why for this slide right here, I just watched this one YouTube video, The Secret Language of Trees, and I Googled this book, The Hidden Life of Trees. There is an increasing acceptance to the idea that consciousness may extend to vegetation. Perhaps these authors wouldn't say that. They would say, oh, well, we're talking about a type of chemical communication. We're showing the interconnectedness of biomes, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to say that's what these authors are saying, but there seems to be, I think over the past 10 or 15 years, this conditioning of the public to be more open to the idea of consciousness being more widespread. And that, I feel like that's really interesting because here we are kind of coming full circle where we're going back to this idea of animated nature, perhaps borne out by our conceptions of science as they are right now. So, we have this Fraserian scheme where it goes, magic, transitional figures to religion, transitional figures between religion and science, and it doesn't seem to stop there. We've talked about this in regards to the quantum, circling back around to the magical, but now we see ecologically we are seeing a circling back to animism, and I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to me, it's demonstrable that these beings have a consciousness.
What sold it for you that they have a consciousness? You didn't have to watch this video or read this book to feel that way.
I talk to them.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
Do they talk back?
Yeah.
Is it true?
I mean,
It's true to me.
It's true to
okay.
her.
That's good. That's wonderful.
That's my experience.
We'll have to do a greater interview on that particular subject. I mean, I'm open to it. Like, why not? Like, the way that I understand reality is that, actually, I don't know how I understand reality, but it seems to be that the entire reality is in some way responsive to consciousness. So it doesn't really surprise me that there could be something signaling back and doing a form of communication with us. This is a larger issue off topic from Frazer, but I'm just my own personal experience. I have come to understand that reality is dynamic, synchronistic, and I think I am some form of panentheist. I'm still working this out where like God is working through, but is not identical with nature. So I sometimes think that when I see a symbolic communication between myself and the reality, it's God working through it. But so I would say I talk to them too, maybe not just the trees, but just the reality in general.
Yeah, of course.
It's a theory I'm still working on. So
I mean, do you subscribe to the idea of Henri Bergson, that the idea of creative evolution? I really liked that idea when I studied it back in pandemic. I studied it.
it's to be honest, I am rusty. I don't really remember exactly what I mean. I know Bergson is the creative evolutionist. I don't really believe in evolution in general. So I haven't really gone back to think about whether or not I could be a creative evolutionist. I'm open to revisiting it. Could you recapitulate what creative evolution is for us, or I can look it up real quick.
That would be better.
Okay, let me just. I think it's worthwhile. Or if
I have it up from Britannica, if you'd like me to read that.
Yeah, can you enlighten us, Jordan?
Sure. This says creative evolution, a philosophical theory espoused early in the 20th century by Henri Bergson, a French process metaphysician, one who emphasizes becoming, change, and novelty in his Evolution Creatrice, 1907. The theory presented an evolution in which free emergence of the individual intelligence could be recognized. It was thus wholly distinct from previous deterministic hypotheses that were either mechanistic or teleological, and represented evolution as conditioned either by existing forces or by future aims. Bergson based his theory on the distinction between matter and the élan vital, or life force, the progress of which he saw as a line continually bifurcating or diverging from its course. The evolution of matter is orderly and geometric. Disorder, however, with free and unpredictable creativity, is the effect of the life force on its material surroundings. The argument is largely conducted by means of striking metaphor and analogy. Life, for instance, is compared to a wave, spreading outward toward a circumference that is broken down at one point only into an artillery shell from which new shells scatter when it's burst.
So there's a lot there to cognize. I mean, at the very least, it seems like it's pushing back against a total materialistic determination of how things unfold. So you asked me if I could subscribe to that. I'm open to it, but I can't just say yes right now. What do you think, Aastik?
I like that idea of like unlimited creativity and unlimited novelty was very comforting to me, because uh, back in the day I thought like life goes like this. But when I read Bergson, I thought that, oh, there's these things that are undefinable, and that we cannot actually like categorize in words in concreteness, but they exist and they create these random bursts of creativity. That idea was very comforting to me. So I like that. Like it was not always towards death or something. It was very akin to what Nietzsche called like will to power. Like I thought like will to power is not like domination or something, or like a flower blossoming out. It's like he wants to live this flower and it's going to blossom. That's how I thought about this, all of this uh, creative evolution, and I all that.
Yeah, I think it's what's really interesting is like, what does it require of us from a metaphysical perspective? What does it tell us about God and soul, or a world soul, or something like that? And that requires going deeper than just the Britannica summary that Jordan read for us. Although she did a great job at it. We
That
should
was
have
very
you do that more on this sort of thing. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks for bringing that concept up, Austin. I really enjoy it. It'll be something great to explore further. And Luke, your trepidations at first of, well, I don't really believe in evolution. This is a very different usage of the word evolution
I know.
that seems to break out completely of this linear time constraints that typical evolution really
I guess what I'm,
presumes.
I guess what I'm trying to say here is that I'm skeptical about uh, any in regards to the biological bodies. I think in some ways I very much believe in evolution of consciousness. So where I am in these different species of evolution, I tend to think about it purely from like a spiritual or intellectual place. I think you could have an evolved soul or consciousness, but yet the biological substrate is fundamentally unchanged. And I guess we're more of the evolution that I was taught in school, and is that, monkey men and all of that stuff, right? And that's not. I'm completely uninterested in that. And this seems to be trying to split the difference. I think it's an interesting question. If you have beings that become so spiritually evolved, do their bodies start to transform as well and become completely new species, perhaps unable to procreate with with the original line? I think that's an interesting question. So, well, should we go to the next slide?
yes.
Okay. All right. Let me get there. We're on one. We're just on slide one. Are we on slide 130, 33? Is that where we are? Yeah. So, I mean, these are these are the rain and sunshine powers of tree spirits, the first chart. And there we've, you know, I could go through all these different ones. Like, for instance, in this one, we have when the missionary Jerome of Prague tried to cut down sacred groves in Lithuania, women protested, claiming the groves were the source of rain and sunshine. The Mundaris in Assam believe felling trees in sacred groves angered the Sylvan gods who withhold the rain. In Monyo, Upper Burma, villagers offer food and prayers to the spirit of a tamarind tree, seen as the rain-controlling gnat, and perform rituals like singing the rain song to ensure rainfall. So, we've been talking about some really deep abstract concepts. These are just, these are the rituals. These are the rituals that Frazer is documenting. I think we could go to the next slide unless someone has something to add here. It's interesting. It's just we've kind of talked about it in a roundabout way. Aastik, do you have anything you want to add, or before we
No,
go to crop growth?
it's something that's very common. I don't think it's self-explanatory. I think it's
Yeah. Okay. So if we go to slide 134, this here we have the tree spirits that are believed to influence crop growth. I mean, this, there's a lot. I think all in all, when I look all the different, I think I had something like 50 some different examples of rituals for all the different categories here in this presentation, but just to point out a couple, the Galas dance around sacred trees, praying for good harvests, while Swedish peasants place leafy branches in corn furrows for abundance. Those are a couple that stuck out to me. If anybody else has ones that, we have here the Harvest May custom in Germany and France, where they decorate branches or trees placed on where they place them on farmhouses and barns, and this embodies the vegetation spirit. So, yeah, just more documentation of what we're talking about.
Yes, there's so much of it.
What's that, Aastik?
I was thinking that wasn't there a lot of scholarship back in the day during Frazer's times about like Native American cultures? Like they must also practice these things. I thought that it was probably missing because you see all these things like I remember something like there's a gas pipeline, I suppose. But then there was a protest in America, so they were making these arguments that this is their sacred land and this we should not like build a pipeline through here. So like is this connected to them? Do they also believe in these things that this is actually a sacred land to them?
I'm going to defer to Jordan because she's like 1/16 Native American, supposedly.
Yeah, that doesn't make me an authority. There's so many different groups. So by no means is this, what I know is many of these traditions view the land as sacred. And there's even particular spots that have significant meaning. There's different perspectives on why that is, but Joseph Campbell, what was the other woman's name who did the sand painting stuff?
Maud Oakes.
Maud Oakes. That was much more about consciousness than environmental issues, but yeah.
Well, Aastik, I don't. Have you been to America, Aastik? So, we're not. I don't. We don't regularly interact with Indigenous and Native American culture. At least I don't. Ironically, like my sports team was once named after Native Americans, but we changed our name. I think you're right to point out, like, why didn't Frazer include Native American practices, since especially through the media, like we get all this information about them being in touch with the land. It seems like, and at the time he was writing this in the late 1800s, early 1900s, I think we have to, I don't know what the status of scholarship was about amongst Indigenous people of the United States at that time. I'm not sure the scholars had been embedded and really developed the literature to draw from. Perhaps unlike the British that were running empire for longer and perhaps were more embedded in India and other places of the world where he was receiving these correspondences. I think elsewhere in the Golden Bough so far, I think we have heard him. I'd have to go back and check my notes. I think occasionally, I think he has
some examples, but like I was thought like that's a prominent example. Those guys, they show up a lot of time, and they're associated with this imagery of nature and the union with the nature. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I don't know. It's. I think you're right to point out that it's a bit of a blind spot here. So I would say that would be if there are any Frazerians out there today, they could supplement this or complement this material if they have that information. Perhaps someone has done that.
I was just one more. I don't want to make this very political about it, but like the interactions of the interactions of mainly, I think, the people that were actually the Native Americans and the people that came. So they were actually most interactions were actually maybe from missionary perspective. So they were thinking of like teaching them instead of like learning from them. So maybe that their culture got lost in the mix in a way. So I'm just an idea. I'm not sure if that's actually true because I read the travels of a lot of missionaries. So I thought about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that was the case. I think, and I think that's a fascinating point that you've brought up, because so much of the rituals that Fraser does talk about is demonstrates the collision between these pagan rites and the attempt to bring these people into Christendom with syncretizing it with different saint feast days and things like that. We're going to see Saint George get mixed together with some of these rituals. We're going to see Saint, is it Bride or Bride? I threw together a slide about it at the very end, or Saint John. Like these fertility festivals get mixed together. So what you're saying about the missionaries going in, you would think we'd have a little bit more information about that collision between these beliefs, and perhaps we do. I'm not, I'm not an expert in this sort of thing. How dare I try to do this on the internet without knowing?
I mean, in my own experience with my family, there seems to be a larger trend of intentionally diluting out that culture from the general population, whether that be through everything that went on with reservations. You look at a lot of traditional foods, and in some of these cultures today, what are traditional foods are really foods based off of rations that were given out by the US government after people were forcibly removed from lands where they lived in a way of relationship with the lands and lived off the land, then switching over to, getting really low quality wheat and, processed ingredients that now, like, these cultural staples are things like sweetbread or things that you never would find if these cultures hadn't intersected. But I know history as we know it is pretty fraught. So it's hard to know what's what. But just based off of my own lineage and my own family, it was less of a blending and more of, I would say, a dilution. So we don't really have, I think your hypothesis carries a lot of weight, is what I'm saying, Aastik, of, if we have a missionary perspective and it's really about transforming these individuals, that's a different intention than trying to, like, be an anthropologist with a perspective of not intervening or changing the culture.
Something that I just thought of that may be relevant and worth looking into, because I have very limited understanding. I think I've read one book recently on Native American culture that is this Maud Oakes text that I read that I thought was relevant to The Shining. But I wonder if the totem pole could be connected to the maypoles. That would be one thing that I would be I'd be inclined to research. I mean, if you've got all these European countries propping up these poles for cycles of renewal and regeneration, my understanding of the totem poles do something different, but I think that might be a point of convergence.
Yeah, maybe I'd have to think about that more. They feel like they have very different purposes to me and different meanings to me, but that doesn't mean that there's not overlap.
What is a totem pole, by the way? Like, is it something?
Do you want to pull it up, Jordan? I'm pulling up. A totem pole. Yeah, it's a great question. I act like I know. Do you want to read to us perhaps the wiki on a totem pole or something? And the Maud Oakes book that I'm referring to is Where the Two Came to Their Father. This is a study that she did on Navajo sand painting. That's the one I make reference to it in one of the videos that's on my channel. Just if you can search Maud Oakes, I believe it seems like some of the sand paintings that she was talking about. I speculate that it possibly connects to the sand paintings that are in The Shining that Jack throws the tennis ball against.
Yeah, look at the image of a totem pole. It's relevant to The Shining.
Yeah, for sure.
I can try to find an image, but the definition that came up And of course, we're not asking people who participate in such rituals, so there might be a different perspective, but the general definition or understanding of it is a tall carved wooden pole created by indigenous peoples, typically in the Pacific Northwest, typically feature a series of figures and symbols that represent family lineage,
Mm.
clan history, and significant cultural events. So to me, like, there seems to be a pretty big difference between the maypole and that, but perhaps not. Perhaps, like, I probably don't understand maypoles as well as you both might, but this is about really, like, creating a visual representation. And I don't really understand the psychology of it, if it is in fact, like, one of the charts very early on is like, is this a container for the spirit of
Yeah.
something to embody, like a talisman, basically.
Yeah.
I think that's like a deeper conversation to have about totem poles, but the more surface level is, it represents the family lineage.
My understanding of them, and I am not some expert, is that they either contain the spirit, or a container for the spirit, or they drive spirits away. And if they are a container for the spirit, I think that would make it relevant to what Frazer's talking about here. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, that's kind of my sense of it as well. I don't know what language they would use for it, and that's the whole thing here too. There's a cool book called, I think, Sand Talks or something like that, that gets into Aboriginal Australian language and how, like, the language is just completely different. So some of these things we're talking about are more implicit in their actions, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Sure.
just trying not to make assumptions on something
Gotcha.
I did not study before hopping onto this.
Yeah. You're good. All right. Why don't we go, because we've got a lot of
We've
slides
got a
here.
lot.
Yeah. Why don't we go to
Fertility.
Yeah, and this is some of the stuff that Aastik can weigh in on. I'll just mention a couple here. Maybe Aastik can say something about the Imblica officinalis in northern India, right? The sacred Imblica officinalis tree receives libations, a red or yellow string around its trunk, and prayers during the month of Falgun, or February, for the fruitfulness of women, animals, and crops. And then I think you may have actually observed this with the coconut
It's
offering.
outside my
Tell us
house.
all about the. Yeah, Frazer says the coconut, called Shrifala, or fruit of Shri, symbolizes fertility, as given by priests to women seeking motherhood. Maybe you can tell us something about this.
I mean, the first one, it's about, like, wife praying for the long life of her husband. So she kind of worships a tree, and she I don't know what the story is, but it's like maybe the tree has a long life, so she's connecting it to the tree. A lot of times, like, sometimes there's astrological conditions when, like, the woman, astrological conditions is like her husband will die. So what they do is they marry her off to a tree first. So okay, this is the first. This the person will die, then she can get married to the other person. So these things, they happen. So a lot of things women do. Like, my mother still does this. I bring a banyan tree branch, and then she wraps around a lot of strings around it, and then she prays, and then makes sweets, eat it. And coconut too. Coconut is like to inaugurate any event. So coconuts are mostly for inaugurations, and like if there's a wedding, if the bride is entering the house, then they burst a coconut. It's not. I'm not sure if it's very interesting to you. It's like
No, it's
everyday
fascinating.
practice.
I'm super fascinated because we're in the West, or in America, like, we're looking at this like it's just words on the page. This seems something far removed from us. Like, we can try to find echoes of it that may still endure. And I think it's going to be super interesting to me, since you live in a culture where all this stuff is still where people are marrying trees and stuff like that. That's like something that
It's kind of a joke, baby. It's like, oh, every,
I
like,
don't.
like
I'm
a
just,
silly, quirky tradition. Yeah. Not like they're
So
seriously marrying them.
do people really believe in it, or is it just kind of for fun?
It's they don't want to take any chances. That's what I'm going to say.
Mm.
They, you know, that's why they marry. Like, what's the harm of marrying a tree? Like, okay, let her marry a tree first. No, why risk getting a groom like unlucky?
So it's kind of like superstition. We have
It's
like
a
all sorts of
superstition. Yeah, it's a superstition, like lucky charms and sort of thing. Some women
Yeah.
actually do believe it, like who they have like strong families, and then their mother tells them, oh, okay, this is actually so. But like in general, like my mother, she's not like we're super religious, but she actually does it. What, for good luck, for good things to come in the future. But it's not. It's actually fun to like engage in these activities. Like,
So
oh
you like living in a world where these rituals are everywhere.
yeah, they're not super serious. That's the thing. It's not like
Yeah.
they're trying to kind of MK Ultra the whole country. They are sometimes. They are sometimes doing that. They are trying to make political statements, like cloaking them into religious mythology. But in general, like people that living day to day, they're just like quirky superstitions. Like women, they find something to do. Okay, this festival is coming. I'll make this dish for this day. So there's a whole plan for a day. Then I'll dress up, and then the man would come, and so there's a festivity, there's a sort of festivity going on. It creates a lot of novelty in life. That's what I say. If you look at the calendar, it's full of festivals. This festival, this festival, another festival,
Right.
another festival. It's not like 5, 3, 6 days. Like whole month will be full of festivals if you actually want to celebrate those festivals. That's the thing.
I feel, it's interesting reading all of this stuff. Like I'm kind of two minds about it because I can see, like, I was like, oh man, it'd be like super fun to go to all these midsummer festivals and the maypoles. I was like, because we don't have that in America, as far as I know. Maybe certain parts of the country do. I've never gone. I don't think I've ever gone to like a maypole thing. But it's like, wow, like this sounds super fun. It's like you're adding more to the calendar, like it's enriching. But then at the same time, given my puritanical background, we even have like some quotes from Puritan writers who Frazer mocks for being so serious, who like call these maypole festivals like the work of the devil. And that, I think that he talked about dragging a tree out of the forest and setting it up is creating a stinking idol. And it's interesting. I can to be honest, I can kind of relate to that too. This going back for, and then in America, it's like we have to create these new, we had to, like, since we're such a young country, we had to create these new festivals, this new mythology, because we're divorced from
I would argue it's good business
yeah,
to have
okay,
created all of these fake holidays for
business
us.
for who?
That's yeah.
Well,
We've got a lot to cover.
Oh, you can talk about it. I'm just sharing my own personal struggle with it.
Oh, I mean, just search Edward Bernays, and that's probably all that we need to say.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, a lot of this is social programming. How many holidays do we have that are centered around war?
Yeah. And we got one coming up.
We have one next week. Although Midsummer, oh, that's satanic. How dare we celebrate life?
Well, I have not seen the Midsummer movie, but the way they try to...
That's not what I'm talking about.
I looked that up because Aastik mentioned it, and it was like, oh, this is like a horror movie that's supposed to make it seem like this like super violent thing. And as far as I can, Aastik's probably actually seen it. As far as I can tell, there's no like human sacrifice or anything like that in any of these midsummer rituals. Maybe, actually, they probably had witches and things like that they burned, but it wasn't. Now, at least now, it's like it's just like puppets and stuff. It's like effigies. It's like all in, the only grisly thing that he documented and all this stuff was like a frog execution.
You do have a resurgence, I would say, in people celebrating solstices. We're trying to find non-MK Ultra holidays and ways of marking the passing time.
What if the gods themselves are doing the MK altering and not just governments?
It depends on what we're talking about when you say gods.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah, that is. It depends on what we're talking about, but yes, we're talking about consciousnesses that are non-physical, that influence the earth plane through
yeah,
human actions. Yes.
yeah. I'm not trying to
Yeah,
be
that's going on.
I'm not trying to be disputatious, but I think it's interesting to think about. Like maybe it
Hmm.
wasn't like the government that came up with MK Ultra. Maybe they learned it from somebody else.
Highly likely that it is inspired by other things. Well, and a lot of what we see is a hijacking of spiritual technologies that have a really positive capacity to them that have been distorted and manipulated or given to people in pieces in ways that really fracture the psyche instead of really providing people a framework to expand their consciousness
Yeah,
and you know
I
That's a
hear
good
you.
mhm.
point.
I hear
I mean,
you.
But I also like I also participated in a like maiden fire festival that my good friend created to be kind of a celebration of the spring energy, and it's during, I forget the name of it, but there's like a specific spring festival that is associated with pagans that is all about like young girls, like I don't know, like I see people trying to recreate those things in America, but it does feel like we went through a great dip into the Leith River over here on this continent, and there has been a massive attempt to kind of fill that void with things that I'm not sure necessarily serve us as spiritual beings.
That's right. By the way, could you progress to the next slide just so people, if they're watching this at home, can? I'm not going to mention any of the ones here. Maybe the only one that was interesting. I mean, not they're all interesting to me, but like I think I was going to the chemise on fruitful tree. The barren women. This is in Slavonia. Barren women place the chemise. I guess that's like a nightgown or something on a fruitful tree on St. George's Eve. If a creature appears by morning, they wear it for fertility. Barren women in this is in Kyrgyz. I don't even know where that is. Barren women roll under a solitary apple tree to conceive offspring. The one that, if people want to take a picture of that, and if you could go to the next slide, Jordan. And I think there we go. There's this tradition also of like grabbing onto trees for in childbirth, and one of the most famous examples of this is Leto's tree clasping myth with the birth of Apollo and Artemis. Although I could not find any artwork of that. This is an Italian landscape with Latona, the Roman name for Leto, and the Lycian peasants. So I just thought it was interesting.
Is that like a lizard head?
I don't. Yes, I believe it's from the metamorph. It's a frog
wow.
head, actually. I believe
Oh, okay, a frog.
I believe she transforms one of the peasants into a frog, which is pretty deep considering the frogs online and everything. But I believe
Uh,
it's in Ovid's Metamorphosis. So I don't know the story off the top of my head. If Jordan, actually, could you look that up? Because Aastik was going to say something. I interrupted him. This would be a good way to get that story out there. I'm curious.
this tree clasping myth, I was studying about other tree myths. So there's a motif that is found in Buddhist temples and in Hindu temples too. It's called Salabhanjika. So it's about the mother of Buddha, mother of Siddhartha, and there'll be statues of women holding up trees like this. So like when they actually felt that they were going to give birth. So it's supposed to be that. I thought that was connected. I thought like, oh, a synchronicity between this Greek myth and then this Buddhist myth about Buddha's mother, like holding on to a tree and getting uh, whatever birth pains. What? What?
Yeah, I think that's great. Part of me thinks too is like how much I'm not prepared to really speak on it, but the clearly, I mean, thinking about all this, and I think Frazier's going to circle back to it at some point, but the Garden of Eden stories as well, I think are obviously going to be relevant to
Oh
all this.
yes.
Did you pull up the Leto and the Frogmen, Jordan?
Yeah, basically, she was fleeing and she came across a spring after giving birth to the twins.
Mhm.
And these peasants tried to stop her from bathing the babies and drinking the water. So she cursed them
Interesting.
for their lack of hospitality
That's
and doomed them to swim and hop in the murky waters of the spring, says
I
Wikipedia.
yeah, it's kinda crazy when you see things like this in classical art. Like, it kinda catches you off guard. You're like, "Oh, this is just a really pretty painting," and you go, "Wait a tick, is that a man with a frog head?" Like, and it's, like, kind of especially monstrous. It's interesting.
Like,
Yeah, it'd be a good avatar, one of these frogmen.
is there an
Or
actual connection to this? But like the creator of this frog, he actually found this paint. Is like actually referencing this painting, or it's like just a coincidence?
what, say that again, I'm sorry, what was the question?
I think you're talking about the frogman on the internet. The original artist, was he actually referencing this painting, or it is a coincidence?
Oh, that's just a coincidence. I was saying, oh well, maybe this is a synchronicity.
Yeah,
I constantly think about, I'm always thinking about Apollo and Artemis and the spirit of Apollo and the Book of Revelation and
yeah.
frogs.
That actually fits right here. Like uh, it's good.
Yeah, it's not well developed. It's just kind of, I just kind of see these archetypal figures in play, but it's not a developed theory. All right, so why don't we go to 138? I was just talking. I mentioned at the beginning about Pinocchio, and I think I've pretty much said a lot of why I think maybe the Pinocchio story would fit in with this schema of Frazer's about anthropomorphic manifestation of the vegetative tree spirits. And I just, in this slide, I was curious about whether or not the Pinocchio story applied to other films of Kubrick. In some ways you have like reverse Pinocchios, with the brainwashing of Alex with the Ludovico technique. Is he made into a real or a fake boy? Or the cadets or the recruits in Full Metal Jacket, they're turned into kind of puppets, right, as they go through basic training and become extensions of the U.S. military. What's happening with Dave in 2001? Does he go through a Pinocchio experience where he becomes a real boy? Um, yeah, and even Jack. I wondered about Jack. There's all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. If that's somehow connected to this, and if Jack kind of went through a reverse Pinocchio situation, we'll bring this. I don't have a lot to really comment on it. I think I've already said it, but when Jordan and I go deeper into the Pinocchio story, I think some of these other scripts will visit.
Can I talk about this maybe?
Sure, of
Some
course, of
ideas for
course.
future. I mean, even in this GIF, it looks like Alex is actually putting on a nose, a longer nose, like a long Pinocchio nose. And even later in the film, he wears this Pinocchio mask of a long nose. So maybe it's like a man is Kubrick is indicating that this man has now learned to lie and deceit. So this is the result of lies and deceit. And you've mentioned a lot about like Full Metal Jacket turning people into robots, and Joker makes a claim that he does not want robots; they want killers. They want
Right.
not following orders, but like filled with this instinct to attack a person. And I was thinking I'm jumping a bit. I was thinking about Barry Lyndon in the sense of Pinocchioism. So in the beginning of the film, the Barry talks like he's rejected by Nora for Captain Quinn, who's a regimental officer, and he's very distraught at this revelation that his uh, love of his life is abandoned him so quickly. So he talks. She tells him that I won't dance with you because you're not a real man. And then she says, "Oh, I'll show you who the real man is." So it's like this Pinocchio. His struggle is I want to be a real boy, and that Barry's struggle from is planted. The seed is planted in him that he wants to be a real man. So he tries to invest in this idea of the this cultural masculinity. and then tries to become a real man. As he joins the military, he fights duels actually for this
Mm-hmm.
woman. He actually invests in this mythology of what a man should be, what he should do, and then he becomes that man. And then he is not able to actually be that man when he actually reaches the position where he wanted to be. I'm just riffing on the idea of like this
Sure.
parallelism between real boy and real man. So
I think that's fantastic, and I think we should revisit it. So I think that's a great, and who's the blue fairy if this perfectly maps, right? I think that's an interesting question.
yeah, Blue Fairy, that Chevalier, he actually, you know, maybe,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe.